The hitting champ. That crown used to mean something big in MLB. Winning a batting title often bestowed the label game's best pure hitter on the player with the best average. It's a simple stat. Hits divided by ABs. Stan Musial, Willie Mays, and Hank Aaron all won batting titles. Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, and Ted Williams did too. The list goes on. Pete Rose, Miguel Cabrera, Mookie Betts, Jose Altuve, and for the past 3 years, Luis Arraez. In fact, he's won a crown for 3 different teams over that same span, something no one else in baseball history has ever done. The Twins, the Marlins, and last year, the Padres. To put in perspective how special that is, consider the last player to win 3 straight titles was indeed Miggy, when he was bashing for the Tigers between 2011 and 2013. Cabrera is a surefire first ballot Hall of Fame pick in 2029. What about Arraez? If we were rocking bell-bottom slacks around the year 1977, the question would have been considered ridiculous. Of course he's on a Hall of Fame trajectory. He has a career batting average of .323. How could he not be? But at around that same time, guys like Bill James, Tom Tango, and Pete Palmer were toiling away in relative obscurity, doing pen and paper calculations to devise statistics that would revolutionize how we analyze the sport of baseball. James and Tango were developing a way to assign each MLB player one number that would quantify the total wins the player helped his team amass during the season. Palmer was toying around with a way to calculate how productive a hitter was, to prove that hitting for power led to more wins than hitting for a high average. And not just for today's players, for every MLB player who'd ever stepped foot on the diamond. But those sabermetricians were a decade or more away from major breakthroughs that would shake the very foundations of the sport. For the vast majority of fans wearing Dacron polyester in 1977, the guy that won the batting crown was no doubt among the most productive and valuable players around. To even question this notion would have made no sense based on how most fans consumed player stats. ABs, hits, runs, RBI, the total box score that appeared each morning in a newspaper. On Sundays, the league's entire span of averages ran in 2 long columns. And starting at the very top, like an emperor on his throne, was the leader in batting average for each league. That's where Luis Arraez has lived for the past 3 seasons, among baseball royalty. But is that really an accurate reflection of Arraez's place in the game? Is he really the straw that now stirs the vaunted Padres offense? What do these new metrics that were being cooked up in the late 70s tell us about the productivity of Luis Arraez? Spoiler alert, he was actually one of the least valuable everyday players in the game in 2024. But don't run to the comments just yet. Hear me out. I promise I'll back up my case with evidence. You're probably asking yourself right now, how could you possibly say that a batting champion is one of the least valuable everyday players in the game? Even the most ardent fans of advanced stats might find this eyebrow-raising. What gives? What gives is the way many people still perceive the game of baseball to this day. When you rely on a box score for your daily dose of hardball, you get the basic statistical display that puts an emphasis on hits, RBIs, home runs, the like. If a player went 2 for 4 with 2 singles, that was a great game. If another player went 0 for 2 with 2 walks and 2 strikeouts, not so much. Bill James was among the first to attempt to take a sledgehammer to this simplistic view of the game. In 2002, he dropped Win Shares, a work built on 25 painstaking years, where James pulled together decades of research to give every significant MLB player from 1876 to 2001 a number he called a win share. Each win a team got came with 3 win shares, so a 90-win team would divide up 270 win shares among the players. This approach obviously became the basis for wins above replacement, which in turn became the de facto baseline stat to assess a player's overall value. WAR calculates performance above replacement using a combo of batting, running, hitting into double plays, defense, and positional scarcity all rolled into one number. 10 runs that a team scores usually equates to a win, and so WAR is determined by dividing runs above replacement by 10. WAR has allowed fans to see just how valuable someone like Ben Zobrist was for the Rays in 2009, when he had the second highest WAR in the game at 8.7, despite playing multiple positions and not hitting 300 or 30 homers or driving in 100 runs. Shout out Foolish Baseball for his recent video on him, by the way. The other more recent stat that's burst onto the scene is OPS, or on-base percentage plus slugging, which was the brainchild of Pete Palmer. Palmer came up with a powerful concoction of just simply adding 2 stats together, that on-base percentage plus slugging, to create a powerful tool for evaluation and prediction. He, with John Thorne, spelled it out in his 1984 classic, The Hidden Game of Baseball. Using OPS, Palmer could calculate the value of an average MLB hitter and then rank players in relation to this normalized value. Thus, the birth of OPS+, where 100 is league average and fans can see where their favorite players sit in the pecking order. If a player has an OPS+ of 110, he is 10% better than league average. At 90, he is 10% worse, and so on. Let's now look at Arraez in 2024 from 2 different viewpoints. One will use the standard methods favored by old school types, average, hits, and strikeouts. Then we'll switch it up and look at this same season using the new tools at our disposal, WAR and OPS, along with a plethora of Fangraphs and StatCast data. Let's start with hits. Luis Arraez got 200 of them last year, and that mark has hollowed overtones. 200 hits used to be a true measure of greatness. Last season, in fact, only one other player, Bobby Witt Jr., had more, at 211. In 2021 and 2022, no player surpassed 200 hits. It's one of those things that's arguably getting harder to do over the years. Pete Rose, the late great troubled hit king, exceeded 200 hits in a season 10 different times in his career. So did Ichiro, consecutively, which also included setting a record of 262 hits in a season in 2004, a record that likely won't be broken anytime soon, if ever. To put it simply, hits are why kids play baseball in the first place. No 10-year-old ever brags about a lofty on-base percentage. Hitting is the reason that baseball has any fans at all, and it's among the hardest thing to do in sports. Even elite athletes like Michael Jordan and Tim Tebow found out how hard it was to actually hit professional pitching, and they never even made it to the majors. So, in that regard, only one other person on the planet, Witt, bested Luis Arraez last season in terms of raw production. He had the most hits in the NL, full stop. At a historical level, that does mean something. If we extend the hypothetical discussion further, if getting a hit used to be the entire point of baseball, then striking out was correspondingly seen as a complete failure, right? Again, 10-year-olds don't typically cry after grounding out to shortstop, but whiffing against the kid from across the street? There's no greater shame. With that being said, no one in baseball fanned less than Luis Arraez last year, striking out just 29 times in 679 plate appearances. In his glorious 2004 season, Ichiro himself K'd 63 times in 762 plate appearances, basically double what Luis did. But with this comes a caveat. There's no longer great shame in striking out anymore, and that's partially why the K rate has spiked so much in recent years, rising to roughly 8.7 per team last season, basically 17 out of every 54 outs every game. What are the other reasons for this besides a change in approach? Well, in large part it has to do with the rise in nasty pitching and raw velocity. In one game in 2023, when Sandy Alcantara faced off against Spencer Strider, there were 91 pitches in excess of 97 miles per hour thrown in a single game. In 2019, MLB saw 1,056 pitches over 100 miles per hour. Now it's getting close to 4,000 per season, with many more being registered on dizzyingly high spin rates. Perhaps then it's no surprise that a hitter the caliber of Elly De La Cruz whiffed 218 times last year, and barely anyone seemed to notice. Because the nerds said it didn't matter. These same nerds don't think much of Arraez, as we'll see. His own teammates, however, have a bone to pick with the stats-only approach to appreciating Arraez's game. They certainly seem to value his put-the-ball-in-play approach. Anytime you put the ball in play, anything can happen, so it's very special, infielder Xander Bogaerts said. I think it's a great fit for us. Obviously, he'd be a great fit anywhere, but on our club, for sure. I know the singles hitter isn't really valued as much in this game, but as a starting pitcher, it's exhausting facing guys like that. Pitcher Joe Musgrove said, guys who don't swing and miss, that don't chase a lot, that are constantly on base, that wears you down over the course of an outing. This is how many fans who shun advanced data see Arraez. He's very valuable because he gets a lot of hits. He grinds out at bats. He had the highest batting average in the NL. His team made the playoffs. Why are we even having this discussion? Because that's not simply where the analysis ends. When you put all of Arraez's numbers into the formulas originally conceived by James and Palmer and the other stat geeks at Fangraphs, guess what? Luis Arraez had an F-WAR of 1.1 last season and a B-WAR of just 1.0. In the annals of baseball history, there have been over 13,000 seasons in which a player hit less than 300 and had a higher WAR. In other words, Luis Arraez had a pretty meh season for a batting champion, and that's being charitable. Get ready for the brutality. Arraez ranked 359th in WAR in all of MLB last year, equal to Leody Taveras and Brian Rocchio. Assuming GMs are picking teams at 25 aside from current rosters based on WAR, then Arraez would be taken roughly in the 14th round according to these totals. But wait, hold your horses. It's not just that we don't appreciate batting average. There was another reason that Arraez saw such a mediocre WAR, and it's a bit more old school than you'd think. He played terrible defense, making 5 errors in just 69 games in the field, with horrid advanced metrics that clocked in at a negative 1.1 DWAR and negative 13 outs above average. He played mostly first when he was on the field, often finding himself at DH as well, both positions that cost a player WAR, because these positions demand big offense to make up for the comparatively less effort it takes to play the position, or in a DH's case, simply exist. WAR measures not just offensive prowess, but overall baseball skill. Is it perfect? No, but it's a decent benchmark. With that being said, let's focus on just his offense next, his true calling card. What about his OPS+? Here again, Arise puts up some pretty meager numbers comparatively, an OPS plus of 106, which puts him just barely above average as an MLB hitter. His WRC plus was slightly better at 109, good for 71st in baseball. His WOBA ranked him 73rd. Why were these numbers so low? Because of those 200 hits Arise collected, only 39 were for extra bases. The rest were singles. That translated into a slug of just 392, or 100th best in the game. And if you're thinking, so what? He batted leadoff. Singles are good. Think again. Batting leadoff, Arise cost the Padres 2.6 runs relative to average last season. That determination comes from examining yet another newish stat, RE24, or run expectancy based on the 24 different base out scenarios that arise during a baseball game. Basically, RE24 gives us an estimate of runs per each scenario. A hitter leading off an inning with no outs was worth .491 runs in 2024, but if he reaches first with no outs, he's now worth .890 runs. Great, you think? Arise did that all the time, right? His OBP, in fact, was 328 with no outs and no one on, far above the league average of 302. But get this, if all you really do is get to first, your OBP needs to be around 360 in order for a player to be value neutral. Stick with me here, I promise I'm getting to the point. In other words, extra base hits put runners into scoring positions and allow runners who are currently on base to score. Singles alone don't really cut it. And 2 out of 3 of Arise's at-bats last year were leading off an inning, well above the league mark of 57%. So he was costing the Padres runs because while 25% of on-base events, hits, hit by pitches, or walks were for extra bases around the league, just 17% of Arise's were. You know what's funny? Where these singles would really matter would be more so with players on base. So really, Arise would have been much more valuable to the Padres if he'd batted third. But in a stacked lineup with Machado, Bogarts, Profar, Merrill, and Cronenworth, slotting Arise at third would have definitely ruffled some feathers and probably wouldn't have been strategically the best move. Even 5th or 6th would have raised some eyebrows, but it probably would have still created more runs. That's obviously not what happened though, as they stuck him at leadoff, and Arise finished 8th on the team in runs per plate appearance as a result. Before we keep going, I want to make this expressly clear. I'm not hating on Luis Arise because he's an old school player in an era dominated by 3 true outcomes. Many compare Arise to Rod Carew, a singles hitter who only clubbed more than 10 homers twice in 19 years of MLB service. But this comparison is probably unfair to Rod Carew at this point. In 1973, Carew was the same age as Arise, 27. He got 203 hits, just above the 200 Arise collected last season. Carew had 47 extra base knocks, close to Arise's 39, but Carew had a WAR of 7.0 because he walked 62 times, while Arise walked just 24. His OBP, 411, compared to Arise at 346. Carew was also seen as an above-average defender who stole 41 bases. Arise has 20 career swipes as of now. But the thing is, Arise was actually relatively close to being Carew-like for the prior 2 years before 2024. In 2023, he hit 354, slugged 469, and had an OPS plus of 128, numbers very similar to Rod in his prime. And his FWAR was 3.3, which ranked him 53rd, in the same vicinity as Manny Machado and Willy Adames. His BWAR was actually much better than that, solidly at all-star levels at 4.9. If you go back to 2022, it's very similar, an OPS plus of 128 and another batting title. His OPS was only a shade under 800 because he walked a career-high 50 times. His FWAR came in at 2.7, 63rd in the game, right alongside Gleyber Torres and Randy Rosarena, and his BWAR again clocked in a bit higher than this at 4.2. He was truly valuable in the old-school way and in the new metrics that value getting on base and slapping a few extra base hits along the way. In both seasons, he played okay defense as well, with a DWAR that averaged about 0.3, so he also wasn't penalized for his shoddy glove work. So, what happened in 2024? In October 2024, at season's end, Arise underwent surgery to repair a torn ligament in his left thumb. He'd played through the injury during the last 4 months of the season, and there was no doubt that it had affected his play, perhaps sapping some of his already limited pop. It may also have affected his fielding in a negative way. This isn't the whole story, however. There were definitely pieces of this that were more so his overall approach, as his walk rate was just in the 3rd percentile last season, and oddly, for someone who never struck out, his chase rate ranked near the bottom of the league as well, in the 11th percentile. In 2022, those numbers were in the 78th percentile and his walk rate was in the 51st. But even during his incredible 2023 season where he batted 354, his chase rate had dropped to the 28th percentile and his walk rate had dipped to the 15th. Despite the thumb injury, something certainly seems to have changed in the way that he's been approaching at-bats in recent seasons. Will his shift back next year? Who knows? But a few more walks, a double here and there, and a better performance with the glove, he easily could be looking at a massive rebound in the advanced metrics, for all those who care anyway. So, at the end of the video, I believe I've made a solid case for why Luis Arraez was one of the least valuable everyday players in 2024 per Advanced Analytics. But even with this being said, in my opinion, no fan of baseball should ever root against his future success. The new stats might not work in his favor all the time, but that's okay. He can still be very good even by these metrics with just a few of those previously mentioned tweaks. And hey, seemingly everyone who's played with him says the same thing. He's a great teammate and a hard worker. He wasn't given much of a chance to make it at the outset of his career, and he's proved his doubters wrong every step of the way. That's just awesome, plain and simple, and makes it very easy to root for a guy made in the mold of a bygone era, even in an era of boom or bust. Now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider liking and subscribing, and checking out this playlist for more essay content just like this. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.